Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland in New Zealand, and I'm joined by Zach. How you doing, Zach?
I'm doing great.
Everything good in Seattle?
It is. It's high school graduation season. It's good. It's exciting.
Very good. And today we've got Ilka joining us. How are you, Ilka?
I'm doing well too. And it's ready for vacation season here.
Yeah.
Nice.
But while that happens, we've got a great series talking about circularity, circular construction. Are we avoiding waste? Are we avoiding the term waste? Is that what we're aiming for here? I'm not sure. But we're focusing on.
Are we waiting the term waste or the reality of waste?
Well, but both. I really like the focus on cycles and circularity, and that's what we're going to be starting to talk about today, and diving into some other really great examples that you've uncovered, Ilka, from Europe. So looking forward to getting to that. But before we do, you got some people to thank.
Yes, a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thanks also to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Glavel, Ingui Architecture, Minotaur, Partel, Rockwell North America, StoKorp, and Zola Windows. And thanks too to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Gradient, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, and Source 2050.
All right. And so this week we're going to hear your conversation, Ilka, and you and Mary interviewed Dominik Campanella, who is CEO and co-founder of Concular, based in Germany. And I think he describes pretty well the business case for his company Concular and what they do. So we should jump straight into it.
We're here with Dominik Campanella. Can you tell us about Concular and your role within the company?
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for an invitation. Really great to speak to you. And yes, I'm Dominik. I'm one of the co-founders actually of Concular. And what we are doing with Concular is that we enable the reuse and the recycling of construction materials. And to tell you the story of Concular, I actually have to start already in 2012, because this is where we actually started. About one of our co-founders, Mark, actually thought about, okay, there's so many materials coming out of the construction project, and on the next street there's a new construction project, and the same type of material is going into a new construction, but it's not the materials coming out of deconstruction, although they're in a really, really good state. And this is why then Mark came to use and me and said, like, we have to do here something. On the one side, there's the supply, and on the other side, there's the demand. So let's do a marketplace. That's what was our idea in 2012. And so we created Restado, a marketplace for reclaimed construction material, and we grew it to the largest one in Europe. But what we then actually realized a couple of years ago was that this works, but who is selling and buying is normally private people. And this is also great, and it's important. However, where we can really make the impact is in the large construction projects and the professional actors, and they did not use Restado. And this is why we then thought, okay, why they are not doing that? And to answer the question, we just asked them. So we interviewed more than 100 stakeholders, like construction companies, project developers, and so on. Asked them, why are you not reusing construction materials? And they came up with a lot of different challenges, obviously. And what we then understood is that they need a certain amount of material in a certain quality at a certain time in a certain location with guarantee. And this is not what like a classified ads page like can do. So this is why we said, okay, we have to offer more. We have to actually own the process before and afterward. And this is where then we created Concular, where we say we do 3 steps. First, we digitize materials. Actually, why we are not reusing materials is that we don't know what's in the building. And so in any building, actually, where we are today, even in the one I am, there's no one knows what was built into the building. So normally you build a building, after 1 year, all the documentation is gone. No one knows what's built in. So if there is a deconstruction happening, it's a big challenge, because only the deconstruction company, when it's there, will know what's in the building. And then it's too late to find the right, and they cannot store the materials because it's very expensive to store, logistics and so on. This is why we digitize way before the deconstruction happens, because you know that sometimes 2 years before. So with our technology, so it's like an app which you go through the building, you can get all the materials in the building, and then we can measure how much CO2 is actually embedded in the materials which are in that. And then we can support you on getting these materials where you would normally pay for getting rid of these materials, that you get money for it by selling it to new construction projects or back to manufacturing. This is what we do at Concular with around 70 people all over the German-speaking area, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and in more than 450 projects so far.
Wow, that was quite a story about how your company was founded. And it's really interesting because here in North America, it's pretty foreign concept what you're doing. So I want to kind of slow down and break it up a little bit. And also, when was it that you started? I didn't quite catch that.
So Restado, we started in 2012, and Concular, we started in 2020. So we are almost 4 years old now.
So you hear that a building is going to be deconstructed. How would you hear about it, A? And then B, who pays for your time to go into a building and figure out what materials are in there?
Maybe starting with your first question. So like, how do we know where like a deconstruction project happens? Is basically that the companies are coming to us, so the building owners, because looking now at the European space, so, or maybe putting it more into context. So the construction sector is the largest polluter in the world. So this is a fact, 66% of waste, and half of these emissions are due to the to production of construction materials. So there is a big issue with construction materials, and so this is not only what we see from Concular, but this is also what the regulators in Europe see. And this is why there's more and more regulation coming, meaning like wasting stuff is getting more expensive, and you cannot deconstruct a building anymore without doing like a pre-check, a pre-demolition audit. You cannot just throw away this anymore because you will not get the permission for deconstructing. So they're coming to us because of these 2 reasons. First, they have to comply to regulation, but the second is they can make money with it. As I just explained, is so before you had to pay to get rid of your bricks, what's in the building. Now we give you money, and you can save a lot of money on working with Concular. I think this is really appealing to our clients. So this is like the first question.
I was asking you who pays for your time there, but obviously it's the company who's going to be deconstructing the building.
Actually, the second question is actually not the deconstruction company, but it's the building owner. Because the building owner is getting the money. So they have to pay a bit money upfront for the digitalization, but it's quite inexpensive because with our software, you can make it very, very efficient. I can only now talk in German metrics, but 10,000 square meters takes around 1 day. And so that's quite fast. So it's not a lot of money you have to spend, and it's anyway required. We have to do it. But then this is a really good question you're asking, like, who is doing the deconstruction and are we doing that? And so this is interesting because there's a lot of different stakeholders involved in a deconstruction or construction process. And what we started with was just to match the supply with the demand. So but what we saw, but when we matched that, we had to somehow take care that these materials are coming from the current building to the new building. And that increased a lot of complexity because you have to talk to the building owner, to the architect, to the deconstruction company, to the logistics company, and so on. And they are very often not incentivized to work with you because they say like, we did it like that for the last 50 years. Why should we now do something for you? We can do that, but it will cost a lot of money. So we got a lot of issues on not having any power on like the supply chain, basically from the current to the new building. And this is why we more and more integrate vertically, we call it. So meaning that we are for ourselves, a deconstruction company. So we are going to the building owner saying like, we deconstruct everything for you. And then like all the complexity behind, we take care, but we can say we want to work with this and this company, which we worked before really well. And they're doing that. For example, one experience we did was deconstruction companies are really good in tearing down a building very fast and put it on the landfill, but they're not really good in taking out materials without damaging it. So that's why we started to work not with deconstruction companies, but with craft people who are then coming in and taking that out. And they are much more experienced because these are the ones who are putting in the material, so they know also to put it out. And these are things we can then do by our own when we are basically a deconstruction company by our own. The same actually for the construction. So a client can buy the material, but in Germany, normally you don't buy only the material, you buy also, let's say, windows first. You don't buy 10 windows and then you go to a craft person putting it in, but you buy like 10 windows built into your building, or like 500 square meters of the state or so. And so then we also buy them that with building it in, and then we are just giving it to like craft people. And then we, of course, have people in our own team who are going on the construction site to check if everything works fine and so on. But we are not doing it by our own, but we have much more power in organizing that.
So this is really interesting because I think here in the States, we're just scratching the surface with what you're doing. But there is a lot of thought about embodied carbon, or there's more focus on that. And this is basically exactly what you're doing too. Like here, I think the discussion is a little bit more towards reusing the building itself and not necessarily deconstructing and then using the materials. So I think this is really interesting that in Europe, you're definitely a few steps ahead of us, and that it actually gets in a way incentivized by the government, or the opposite, that you have to pay to deconstruct. So, but how do you I guess you are doing this pre-demolition audit, and back then nobody really thought about reusing different materials. I think going forward now with an awareness, people can actually layer their assemblies in a way that they can be deconstructed a little bit better. Do you see kind of a focus on that with new build? And then going back to the buildings that are already existing, what kind of materials are, work well for deconstruction, and which ones are just kind of a lost cause?
Yeah, so starting with the first question for new buildings, it's quite interesting so there's definitely a lot of talking about new buildings and how to make them deconstructible for the future. For example, we developed something called Circularity Performance Index, so where we can assess based on 5 factors, for example, where's the material coming from, is it primary or secondary source, but also like factors such how good is it put in? Can you take out the material as it is? Can you recycle or separate the materials? So can you reuse it, recycle, and so on? That's all these factors you can for new planning calculate how circular is your building. And so the idea is to have the score between 0 and 100 to have a building permit only possible if you reach a certain score. Right, so this is something which is happening in Germany, also then paired with something called building resource passport, so that there is the necessity to digitize all the materials which are going into the building. So because we are doing pre-demolition audits as we don't know what's in the building, but if you do it for new building, then of course, then you don't have to do the pre-demolition audit afterwards. And this is really great, but normally buildings are getting deconstructed in like 30, 40 years, hopefully later. And the effects of like focusing on new buildings and building new buildings in that way, we will see then also firstly in 30, 40 years, but that will not help right now. And right now we have to do something, but it's a good step. And for example, what you're doing in the US, when I get it right, repurposing buildings or refurbishment and so on, I think this is the best way to go, because looking at the circular economy hierarchy, you have to refuse. So meaning like there's an office building, why do you have to tear it down and building a new office building? Doesn't make any sense. Just keep it and maybe change the facade or whatever. So, and maybe that comes to your second question. What are actually the materials which are really interesting to reuse? And the variety of materials. So starting actually with the outside, you depending on the building, you can have really nice facade elements. So a natural stone, metal facade, alumni facade, all kind of facade materials, or like also then bricks are something which we're selling million of bricks every year. Reused brick, really good to sell. And then also in the interior, of course, we have, depending, like interior doors, for example, are quite good, fire resistant doors, steel beams, but you can also reuse in office building the partition walls, the raised floors, everything basically what's in a building. Everything is which is out of metal glass is normally quite good to be reused, or at least high quality recycled. What is, for example, not going really well is windows, because normally these are 20 years old. They're not anymore complying to the energy efficiency standards, or like same with facing doors and so on. These are most of the times not easy. But also all the technical equipment which is in a building is normally really good to be reused, because normally you maintain them really well, and so you're able also to reuse that. So we have buildings where we can reuse 70 to 80% of the whole building, which can be a lot. Of course, it's not possible for every building, because there can be also toxicity in materials, which makes it then challenging. We don't sell materials which are toxic, but yeah, 70-80% can be a realistic value for a building.
You said something which surprised me, which is that the technical equipment can sometimes be reused, because I would have thought in the same way that the windows no longer comply with energy efficiency standards, that would be the same for technical equipment, especially, for us in the United States. A lot of places there's a big push to switch from gas-fueled equipment to electrically powered. Is that not an issue there?
Yeah, then you're a bit further in the US than we are in Germany, because there's not that push so far. I mean, it's going in that direction. So there's like HVAC. So I don't know, like stuff like air conditioning, right? Yeah, air conditioning, for example, is something. Also, just the spare parts can be sometimes really helpful. But also like the gas stuff and so on. This is something which is still going very well in Germany, unfortunately. And this is something where there's a large market for it. But what we, for example, also do is we work a lot with, also we do also industrial buildings. So there's like a crane inside, or like these equipment. Normally you can also have a market for that. And it's actually not important how old the technical equipment is. It's only important how well maintained and documented it is. And at least in Germany, we see the documentation is really good. So you can basically see for the last 20 years, every month, like what was maintained there, what was changed and so on. And if you have that document, it's really good to sell, because there's also then specialists only focusing on putting that into new buildings and so on. And this is maybe also interesting. And I think this is the same in the US. There are already some actors, quite small, but they're actors who are doing like reuse, maybe some wood or like some bricks and so on. But what we do at Concular, we build an ecosystem so that everyone can go in, and so we give these actors much more of the materials and so on. And I think that makes a lot of sense, and that increases the whole ecosystem. And yeah.
Well, and I also read on your website that you have a reclaim construction material insurance, because sometimes, especially with structural elements like reclaimed wood, once there is like a nail or something in there, the structural engineers are very hesitant to allow those to be used in new construction. So how do you go about that? And this insurance is probably a really good way to deal with that too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what I also just said, like the guarantee and warranty part is very important for our clients, because they're all So we are only selling with Concular to like non-private clients, so businesses. And they always said like, okay, what when something is broken, or what happens if like you put in the steel beam and the building breaks down and so on. So I mean, it could be a really big danger and a really big risk. And so that's why we then partnered with the largest insurance company in Germany called VHV Insurance. And we went to them. We of course had to show them that there's a huge business opportunity. And then basically they said like, oh, let's sit together, let's define some of large material streams and let's try to create an insurance. And we're really happy because we did not expect that an insurance company is so open for this idea. But of course, they see also a business opportunity because we want to really, or like the European Union want that 50% of all materials until 2030 are in a way circular to building materials. So they know there's a big opportunity and they're now the first in the market. And we see it's a game changer for our clients. So if you go to a client and saying like, you can take the materials, by the way, it's insured, then say like, okay, but what's the difference now to a new material? And the answer I can just give is like, it's cheaper, it's much less CO2, and it's faster to get. And then say like, okay, so why we're not doing that? So, and that's definitely changing a lot. So we get a large project with that now.
Can you back up? You said that in Europe, 50%, that they want 50% of construction materials to be reused by 2030. Is that what you said?
Yeah, so circular, so meaning reused or recycled until 2030. This is like what the European Union is saying in their circular economy action plan, which they released 4 years ago, I think, or 5 years ago. Yeah. So, and this is something they still holding on. However, the challenge is that there was not a lot of progress since then, to be honest. So this is why they are in need of like, solutions to solve that. And I think Concular can be a good solution for that.
And then do you sell only within Germany or across Europe? Because you just mentioned the windows, which might not be meeting energy standard in Germany, but maybe in countries with a warmer climate, they're still good enough, right? Is that a market opportunity?
So we are selling also to all neighboring countries of Germany, obviously, because then the transportation is quite good. We also, but for example, what we do with windows is we first look if we can reuse them in Germany. If not, basically there's an initiative which is sending windows which cannot be used in Germany anymore to the Ukraine. Because of course, like unfortunately they are in much need for windows. So then these windows will be collected and they will go to Ukraine and the buildings in Ukraine will be built with that. Sometimes materials can also go to warmer countries such as Italy and so on, building materials. Yeah, but the good thing on the European Union is that you have freedom of goods. So we can just get a truck to, for example, we sell a lot of materials to Belgium, also to France. I mean, we share a really good relation to France. So I'll give you an example. There's also different preferences. For example, in France, partition walls, no interest in partition walls. So we can take their partition walls, we put them into building. Somehow in Germany, people don't like to use sanitary stuff, so like toilets or so. German people don't want to sit on a toilet which was used before. So French people somehow don't have a problem with that. So then we just send all the stuff to France. And so there's a trade happening there. So there's also different preferences in terms of building products.
That's so interesting, cultural preferences for building. But I want to understand, so Ristato is the marketplace that you first established. So you actually have a warehouse where you store things if you can't find a buyer for them right away. And isn't that is it a giant warehouse? I mean, it must be quite the cost to store and handle those materials.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So what we actually strive for is that we can bring the materials from the deconstruction site directly to the new construction site. So without any storage, because storage always costs money. However, we got more and more experience, and so we have developed a concept called urban mining hub. And so the concept of urban mining hubs are really storage facilities where materials are getting stored, where there's sometimes a gap between deconstruction and new construction. So there's maybe 2-3 months or so a gap. So they can be put there, they can be stored, they can be also refurbished, and then can put in. So in Berlin, we have a storage facility of 10,000 square meters, and we will open 4 this year in Frankfurt, Hamburg, Stuttgart, and so on. So all major cities basically in Germany. And the interesting thing is that we work here together always with the city. And the city normally has also some spaces which are free, some storage facilities. And so they are normally giving us the storage facility for free. So we don't have to pay rent, and we are completely organizing and running the place. And with that, it makes then also economically sense. I think we could also pay a bit of money, but to really scale this model very fast, it makes sense that cities are giving these facilities, and then we can just operate from them. And it's not only us operating. So I mean, we're operating them, but it's not only us who can put in material. It can be also architect offices who have like a project on the one side where they deconstruct and a new one, so they can do it for like internal reuse and so on. So this is also services we offer there. And that actually increased the amount of materials which we can reuse from a building massively. As said, like 70-80% is possible with that. And but 10,000 square meters, of course, still not enough. We have that now open for 1 year. And we got it now extended for many more years. And so we are even extending that now by 2 new halls just in Berlin to cope. Because I think we sold around 10 million materials already through that one mining hub. So that's a lot.
That's really, really amazing. And I really like how the government or the cities are really being a part of it. I think that's another really great way of basically subsidizing this endeavor.
Yeah, and these storage facilities would be otherwise empty. So there's no like big effort.
Yeah, so it's a win-win situation for both. That's great. So you talked about scaling this up, and I also noticed on your website that you are offering trainings, right? That you have a Concular Academy. Is that part of the scaling of this idea?
Yeah, definitely. So there's actually, I mean, this is what we think. So we from Concular, we are now 70 people, and we think this is something which can be done in every country. This is a global challenge, and we don't want to do that alone, but we want to make circular construction as the standard. We don't want that you talk about construction and then about circular construction. We just want that you talk about construction, and circularity is just normal. It's the standard. And so this is why we thought, like, how can we make that possible? And there's actually 3 areas where we think we can make an impact above or beyond just increasing the revenue of Concular. And the first is training. So meaning that we have to train a lot the architect, but also the building owners and so on, like really down to like, how is the deconstruction process different if you deconstruct in a way that it's taking out without damage, but then also like the government or like the public institutions, like, and by the way, 50% of our clients are public clients, so cities, municipalities, and so on, and they're really open for that. And so how to understand, give them a sense, like how have they to change to adapt to this model. So this is the first thing we have to, and we also have like lectures in universities and so on. And this is the one thing. The second thing is regulation. So I think, or like in Germany, regulation is only done for new materials. So there is no regulation for reclaimed materials. And this is what we're changing. There's actually 2 things which we think is important to foster such a network. The first one is we need to have CO2 limits per square meter in a construction phase. Meaning that, for example, you have 6 kilo CO2 equivalent per square meter per square meter in the construction phase. You can build with whatever you want. You can put concrete in, you can put wood in, but you cannot be above this limit. And if you use reclaimed materials, it's 0. So this is a very, very important measure, and this is already introduced in France and Denmark, and it changes the whole ecosystem. And the second is that you have to do pre-demolition audit before a building is getting deconstructed. So because otherwise you would just throw it away. But when you do that before, you can see what are the value. And the interesting thing is we can put a number behind how much money you can make. And then it's like a business case, and then it's getting interesting. And the third one is standard. German love standard. So, for example, we created our own standard on how to do pre-demolition audit. So this standard is very important because it helps the policymakers to create a law which is then referring to the standard. So saying you have to do pre-demolition audit, but if you just say to someone do pre-demolition audit, someone is just going with a list and throw it away afterwards. There must be a methodology, and this methodology we created, and this is now getting into law that you have to follow this methodology. And with that, we think you can bring that as a standard and you can scale that and you can create a complete new ecosystem, which brings a lot of also new job opportunities. And I think this is also something which sometimes people don't get, like this is not something just for the sustainability, but this is something also with economic value.
So where is the standard in effect?
Mm-hmm. So interestingly, so we developed a standard in German. We published it in German and English. And then this German standard was adapted by France, Denmark, and Switzerland. So you have to imagine, like they said, like, oh, great that you do the work in Germany. Thank you. We are taking it by ourselves. But in Germany, it's not adapted. So which is an interesting situation that the German standard is not used in Germany, but in other countries. But that has something to do with like bureaucracy in Germany, which can be sometimes a bit slow. And so there's also this special thing that in Germany, construction law is by state level. And we have 16 states. So actually we have to go to every of these 16 states and try to again repeat why this is important. And to be honest, at some point of time, I also have to say, like, I have to focus my time. But yeah, so in France, it's just in Paris. They're saying like we're doing it now, and then it's all over France. And yeah, so but yeah, right now, and the idea or like what is happening now, so it's the German standard, and it's getting now on a European level standardized, which is also really interesting, and will go into the new construction and waste protocol, which is right now revised by the European Commission. So it will be basically rolled out in all over the EU in the next 1 or 2 years.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I was going to comment on how fast you've been moving, considering the German bureaucracy, because I'm very familiar with that. Yeah, talking about like how successful you've been. You've gotten many like awards and various prestigious prizes. And can you talk about that a little bit? Where you've been so successful that you've been getting all this acknowledgement?
So I think I think what makes us special is that we look at it holistically, meaning that we are not just a software which is only digitizing. We are not a construction company. So we are trying to own the whole process and so for example, if a manufacturer don't want to take back their materials because they say like, I don't want to destroy my business, although we think it's a really good business model for them. We are just refurbishing the materials by ourselves and bring it in. And then the manufacturer sees, oh, there's some competition coming up. Oh, maybe I should really take care about that. So this is some tools you can try to somehow bring on the market. And I think these awards and so on, which we won, they help us a lot in gaining visibility, because it's really great that we're speaking here, and it's also a wider audience than I'm normally speaking on. But if you ask a normal person on the street, like, which is the largest polluter in the world, this person would not say it's the construction sector. They would say like flying or whatever. Flying is 3% of GHG emissions. It's important to talk about that. But 40% versus 3%, and how much we talk about flying and how much we're talking about our buildings, this is a big issue. And these awards, they help us to raise awareness and to have like this discussion in our society about that. And basically politicians normally are the ones who are representatives of our society. So the idea is like that this discussion will lead also to better regulation in that space, or better laws. And so this is like, you have to think very strategically, and you have to think also long-term and so on. And sometimes you have to use methods like the one with the manufacturers, which are a bit out of the box. But I think these are the tools you have to use to bring the market forward. Yeah.
You have done a lot of projects, and you mentioned earlier that municipal buildings are a big chunk of your business. Can you just tell us about one specific case that you did, a project that you did, so that maybe the audience can understand better, like literally what happened, what went where in one particular case?
Yeah, I can give you a really good example from Düsseldorf. So Düsseldorf, there is a building, a really nice building, which was the former headquarter of large telecommunication company in Germany, Vodafone it's called. So basically, this building is owned by the state of North Rhine-Westphalia. This is how the state is called. And so the company went out and they want to transform the whole building to like an offices for like administration. And so fortunately, this building, the structure will be not teared down. This is already a good thing. So this is also circular economy because this is refuse. But the whole interior, so it's an office building, the plan was to wipe it out, to take everything out, throw it away, and then just put in like all the new stuff which is used for the administration. So what we did was we went in with 2 people. It's 20,000 square meters, 2 people. 2 days, we digitized all the materials and we found thousands of materials, really high quality. And then what we did was we sold or we matched the supply of the materials with the demand of it in new construction, but also in the planning of changing the building. And what we then did was to sell 70% of all the materials in the building. These were bricks, partition walls, raised floors, carpet. The whole building was full of carpets. Everything, even like the kitchens and so on. And of course, like the technical equipment. So everything you can imagine is in the building. We took out, we sold all over in projects in Germany. And some parts, for example, the raised floors, we even took them out, we refurbished them, and they were put in again. And the result was they saved 60%, 600,000 euros of deconstruction cost. That is a lot. And 160,000 euros of money they made of selling the material. And they also made some more efficiency gains on some other spaces. And so they made in total 1 million euro of revenue. And that is taxpayer money. So we gave them like a lot of money. We saved them a lot of money back. And of course, looking at it on an ecological side, we saved 40% of all the embedded carbon emissions in the building, which is also a lot. And so this is, for example, one project. And this state is owning 15,000 buildings, so meaning they are always deconstructing, new construction, and so on. And now, of course, the challenge is on this is one building, but how can we do it for the other 15,000? And this is like what we are trying right now to go from one to like, always looking at one, and but how can you look at a portfolio and can assess like where are the buildings where it makes the most sense and where you have the biggest impact and so on. So yeah. And this is just like, but giving you an example, we also did the football stadium. Now the European Championship in football is taking place in Germany. So like the stadium was revamped. All the stuff like 4,000 of seats, red plastic seats went out of the stadium. So what are you doing with that? So we bring them in like theaters, and a lot of guys went to fans, which have them now in their own apartment and so on. But sometimes you can also be creative. We did the swimming pool. We sold even like 2 weeks ago a complete industrial hall, 10,000 square meters. It will be completely taken down. So before they photovoltaic things they produce there, it will taken down, and it will put on another space as it is. So it will be one-to-one reuse, the whole building, but just on another location. These are examples of what we're doing.
Do you generally, when you're refurbishing a building, do you try to add insulation or air seal the building to make it less leaky?
This is what then the architects are doing. This is what others are doing. We are then providing the materials, but yeah, this is definitely, it makes sense. So if you look at if we really want to look at the construction sector, how we reduce CO2, of course, the best is to not build new buildings and trying to refurbish the existing ones. And when you want to refurbish the existing ones, it makes sense to now look at energy efficiency and look that you then make them energy efficiency. And you can do that in the refurbishment process. Yeah. And this is happening. It makes a lot of sense because otherwise you have to do it twice.
So we talked about scaling this concept up, which makes a lot of sense. But for you, what are the next steps? What are the next goals for you that you'd really like to reach within the next, 5 or 10 years?
In the next 5 years, we want that this is be the standard, and that basically Concular or companies like Concular taking on that and putting it all over the world. So I think as that is the challenge which existing in the US, in Asia, but also in Europe and so on. So like what we want to reach is really that concepts like Concular are everywhere, and it's quite normal that we are reusing construction materials. And to be honest, it was normal like 80, 90 years ago. Like we reused a lot of the buildings. So it's actually going back to the roots basically. And this is what we want to reach. And that, as said, we want to reach by being a kind of a lighthouse to inspire also others. Most of the things we're doing is open source, so you can just download it on our homepage, like the circularity performance index I talked about. You can just download it. It's explained like our standards. They are anyway open. You can download it for free. And so we want to have the good regulation. We want to have much more education also in our universities about that. And of course, we want to have the right standards.
Amazing. And then just one quick follow-up question. You're talking about the circularity index. We also talked to Anja Rosen, are you working with her together on that? Or?
Yeah, Anja developed something similar, the urban mining index, which is really great. And Anja is one of the most prestigious researchers in Germany for that field, which is really great. And basically, there's like an association, the German Building Council, which is basically like there's like the mining index, there's the circularity performance index, and so on. And so we created now a common standard around like how these index work. So it's not complete the same, but it's based on the same standard, so that a client a partner can now decide like if they want to use the mining index and so on. We work together, and Anja Rosen also was involved in the development of the pre-demolition audit standard, for example. So it's in the end, it's also not a big community, but the people who are in the community are really great, and we are all working together because there's more to win when working together than not to work together.
I read on your website that you had a successful funding round last year, and it's just interesting to me the appeal financially for investors to do this and getting the business going. Just briefly, has the successful funding round impacted your business in some ways that has allowed you to grow differently than you were before? Or?
Definitely, it allows us to create concepts like the urban mining hub, so the storage facilities that I just talked about, and so on. So to be honest, the round like is not that big. So we talk in total, we got like 2.5 million euro in funding, which is around the same in dollars. And now translating that, it's not a lot of money for paying 70 people. So meaning that we do a lot of revenue by our own, but what it helps is, first, it gives us, of course, some resources to also some concepts like the urban mining hub, but it also allows to get some knowledge, because who invested in us is also important. So we have with Strabag, the largest construction company in Germany. So we have now, of course, a lot of access to knowledge, resources, and so on, which they can give us. And also Hagedorn, the largest deconstruction company in Germany, they also invested in us. And so we also have a big link to them. And I think it gives us also a reputation, because like if such large companies are investing in us, that means like there is something behind. It's not like just some crazy people doing something, but they take it very serious. And they give us also access to a lot of resources, network, and so on. So I think that is what the investment was important. But to be honest, to scale it further and to be fast, and it's not that I like to have it fast, but that the climate change is not waiting. We have to actually invest much more money in that. But investors are still not very keen in investing in such companies. I mean, it's a very complex model. I mean, we could take investment if we want, but it would say the majority of investors are not betting too much on the construction sector. And I think that's really interesting, because there are some statistics saying who has the biggest need for investment, and of course construction sector is the highest, and how much money is flowing actually in climate tech startups in the different industries, and the construction sector is the one with the least investment. So the one which has the biggest need, the one who has the least funding. And bringing that and solving this investment gap, this is a challenge we have to solve.
Yeah, I think I read about that too. That's really interesting. So yeah, this was amazing. Thank you so much for all the insight. And I hope that listeners listen very carefully and that we can apply some of your ideas here in the United States as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great.
And that was Dominik Campanella, who's the CEO and co-founder of Concular, based in Germany. Wow, that was really cool, Ilka. I love hearing about not just new companies, but whole new company areas, whole new industries that are emerging. And this idea of basically surveying a building prior to deconstruction sounds amazing. It's sort of almost redesigning or drawing a building in that exists and figuring out what all that's there. Let's start with you, Ilka. What was your sort of main takeaways from your conversation?
So I've been hearing a little bit more about this circular construction coming from Germany. And what I find so interesting is it's kind of a step further from looking at embodied carbon. Here in the States, we're really focusing on what kind of material we're using for new buildings now and making sure that they're low carbon or natural materials. And I feel like looking at circular construction and reusing what's there is taking that a step further because it's already there. It's has value. And I think what they're doing is really describing what that value is of what's already there. And also that they started out with something like a marketplace, but realized that's not it. Right? You can't just do the marketplace. You really have to start thinking much earlier, and you have to continue thinking about what is going to be done and how logistics and everything works once you have that material. So I think it's just amazing business model and very, very thought through by now. And they've only been around for a few years. So I just think it's just so impressive.
That's incredible. I can't believe when you said it started in 2020. I mean, that's
staff of 70.
That's quite a time to start a business, right?
Crazy.
Right.
Nothing else particular going on around that time. Zach, what did you think?
Well, I was a bit distracted by the Germans unloading their used toilet seats on the French, but that pointed to a smart move to look at a broader market, potential market for these reclaimed materials out of these buildings. So one of the things that I thought, well, first of all, I was totally blown away by the success of this effort and that it's actually really happening. I mean, this notion that you could reuse materials, it makes so much sense intuitively. And it also, as soon as you look at it, it seems like there would be so much complication and roadblocks and stuff, but they're clearly blazing a path to make it happen. And I think that one of the really interesting things that he mentioned was the EU policy that's helping to drive that around circular construction, but also like his advocacy for the idea of a kilograms per square foot or kilograms of CO2 per square foot allowance or something like that for construction. As soon as we start counting the carbon intensity of the buildings we're creating, then suddenly these existing materials become super valuable and interesting. Yeah. So it was cool. I honestly assumed that all of this was further off in the future, and so it's cool to see that it's happening.
I'm interested to see what's the bigger driver, those policy changes or just the economics. And Mary asked about who pays for the survey. And it sounds like it's just such a good business model in that the building owner pays to get this done and they reap the benefits financially from doing that by finding buyers, and the buyers presumably are getting a really good deal on perfectly usable materials. So it's kind of a win-win. Combined, I thought that was a really important point about the insurance as well, which I had not even considered. But if you tie that in and take away a potential hurdle or that minimize that financial risk as well, then it really is removing any barriers and creating a lot of financial incentive for all the parties. And I just wonder whether that's going to be the main driver of this type of business, even if policies do or not or don't come into it. Okay, I mean, certainly policies that sound like they're really helping. He mentioned that the requirements to have a survey, there are regulations to have a survey done before buildings are demolished, and I think that's really helpful. He mentioned building resource passports. I think that's a really great concept of having a sort of a scorecard of what exists in any building. The other thing that struck me listening to it was the term deconstruction, which is different from demolition. And typically buildings get demolished. They just, put a big hammer through them and just smash it all down into rubble of mixed contaminated mess that goes into a big hole in the ground. And he mentioned about craftspeople and talking about master builders almost that are skilled in the process of deconstructing just as much as somebody would be in the process of constructing. And I think that's a really important paradigm shift in how we take things apart carefully rather than just smashing them.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing or interesting how it really draws this circle back, right? It's not like this one way where you build and then demolish, and there are completely different people that do it. But once you really look at it in a way that you just described as deconstruction, the same people that started it are going to be there at the end as well with the same skills. Yeah. So it's quite interesting. Yeah.
Good stuff. And I'm looking forward to Concular or some similar equivalent emerging in other countries. Hopefully it'll come to the US, maybe come down under sometime. It's certainly a great concept. So I'm sure there's a business opportunity to any of our listeners.
Yeah. So one thing that I thought was really interesting too was that I think why a lot of this works too is because the government puts so much almost like penalties on waste. Yeah. So you really, really have to pay a lot if you just demolish a building. So I think that's a key component for this to work, because instead of paying someone to demolish a building, you're actually selling what's in the building. So it's kind of turns it around.
And I think that cost piece was interesting about the space requirement as well. And I know in New Zealand and in Australia, a lot of the landfills are operated by local authorities, local councils, and they're expensive. So it makes sense for local authorities to give some land or to provide some space for people to operate an organisation or a company like this, because it actually works out cheaper for the council, because they charge dumping fees, but a landfill is really, really expensive, and there's not much space to build new ones, and building new ones is quite an expensive process for all sorts of reasons. So that was interesting as well, that yes, you need a lot of space to do this well, but space isn't necessarily expensive for doing this sort of thing. Very cool. Anything else from you, Zach?
No, I mean, just reflecting on, to reflect on the huge percentage of landfill waste that comes from construction. So,
yeah, and that target of being able to reuse 70 to 80%. I mean, that's massive.
Yeah.
All right, Zach, what have we got coming up?
So this week we are doing a construction tech episode of Passive House Accelerator Live, and we are joined by none other than Kevin Brennan, one of the co-hosts of Construction Tech and expert in residence at Passive House Accelerator. Kevin is with Brennan Installation Airtightness, and he will be presenting technical details of a carriage house retrofit. And this is actually will conclude this season of Passive House Accelerator Live, and we'll be taking July and August off for the Wednesday live programs and then rebooting back in September. But we'll have lots of great new episodes of the podcast going throughout the summer. So stay tuned for all that.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Ilka. We'll be back again next week with another in this series on circularity and how to do better recycling in buildings.